Friends, today we're looking at chapter 13. We're going to talk about traumatic brain injury. We know that the Bible talks about wisdom and seeking wisdom through studying the scripture, and that God will lead us down the right paths. And I encourage everyone to do that. Read your Bible. I started out about the age of most of you reading my Bible, and I've read it through several times now and really enjoy doing that. So I encourage you to do that too. And there's a world and beyond of wisdom in the Bible. If we would just read it and follow its precepts, it really can help you have a great life. Okay, let's move on to slide 3. You may not be aware this figure is this high, but almost 200,000 people a year in the United States die from head injuries, and about 500,000 experience a head injury of some type or another. On slide 4, there's a link to a website that you can look at and see what the National Institute of Health has to say about traumatic brain injuries, also known as TBI. And when you finish that, come back and go to the next slide. What are some causes of TBI? Well, two big categories, I think, account for most of the brain injuries that there are, and one is different sports activities. If you're in sports where you don't need to wear a helmet and your head is hit, much more likely you'll have some kind of brain injury than someone who is not engaged in that kind of activity. However, helmets, as we know from recent news about professional football players, are no guarantee that you won't have brain injuries, especially when people have repeated concussions through contact sports like football or even basketball or something like that, boxing, any of those. Falling down, hitting your head, running into something like the walls on a basketball court or a volleyball court, getting hit in the head like that, anything of that nature can cause a person to have a concussion or have an even worse brain injury. Another big one, vehicular accidents. People driving too fast, driving while impaired, through some medication, through use of alcohol or drug abuse. Any of those kind of things can cause people to more likely be involved in a car wreck where they have a head injury. One thing I always encourage people to do, well, please, wear your seatbelt. Do not buy into this, oh, you can't get out of your car if you have a seatbelt on, or oh, it's just too restrictive on me because I'm overweight. Don't listen to that kind of thing. Wear your seatbelt. If you don't believe me, talk to ER doctors, and they will tell you. People who do not wear helmets when they're doing things like skateboarding, people who do not wear seatbelts, when they come in, their injuries are much more severe overall. So protect your brain. The good Lord gave you one. Use it to keep yourself safe. If any of you have a child or have a relative who's had a baby and you happen to be there when the baby was going home from the hospital, you may have seen that they had to have a child car seat properly installed in the vehicle before they would let them take the baby out of the hospital. A while back, I was at a hospital to pick someone up, and as I pulled into the lane, there was a guy who was standing outside of his car blocking all the traffic because he was taking a baby car seat out of the box, and he hadn't put anything together, he hadn't installed it, he did not know how to put it in the vehicle. So it took a couple people to come and help him and show him how, but in the meantime he had traffic all backed up for pickups at the hospital, and people were kind of irritated about it. It's safety first, but before you go to pick up someone who's bringing home a new baby or any child from the hospital, make sure that if they're young enough that you have the proper kind of chair or seat installed in the car. Also, don't drink and drive. What are some other causes? Obviously, gunshot wound to the head, fighting, being a victim of some kind of assault where you're hit repeatedly in the head, falls, whether it's home or in the workplace, general carelessness, doing something that causes you to get hit in the head by a falling box. Any of those things can cause head injuries. Something that we're more aware of, I think, these days, war injuries of both military members and civilians. And God bless them for their service to our country and to other countries. But some folks, unfortunately, sustain head injuries. They may be, for instance, riding in a tank, and the tank hits a landmine, or a mortar shell hits the tank, or they're hiding behind some sandbags or a brick wall or whatever it is, and a mortar shell hits it, and the person's head gets rattled to and fro, and that can cause a head injury. Well, what are some of the symptoms? What should I know if I'm a teacher? Well, if you have a child who falls, and let's say it's a child who's in the gym playing basketball and they run into the wall or fall and hit their head on the floor in the gym, they may say they're okay at first, but the other staff members and faculty members need to know this has happened so that they can look for possible signs of a brain injury, which may occur later in the day or even after the child goes home, so the parents, of course, need to know. Or maybe the child falls off the swing set at school or sliding board or something like that and hits the head. Here's some of the possible symptoms. Child may lose balance, not able to walk straight, not able to hold on to things, may appear very confused, dizzy. Child may even start to have seizures, mild or severe seizures. The child's ability to speak may slow down, or the child may not be able to, if you want to use the expression, find their words, use the correct words, and it's a change for that child. Or the child can't even remember how they hit their head, how he hit his head or her head later in the day. How long will these symptoms last? Well, they may begin immediately. It may take a while, though, for the brain to swell, or there may be bleeding on the brain, so it can be a day or two before the child even has symptoms. And the symptoms can last for just a few hours or all the way into being permanent, sorry to say. And as a rule of thumb, most recovery from brain injuries occurs in the first 2 years. And many people, they may have a slight concussion. Let's say they're playing football or something and get hit in the head real hard and may have a slight concussion, but in a couple of weeks they're fine and can go back and play. But coaches are becoming more aware that students who've had multiple concussions may not be a good idea for them to play anymore, even if they are the star player, because that person can suffer permanent brain injury, permanent brain damage by repeated blows to the head. Same thing with students who are wrestlers, boxers, hit in the head by a baseball, volleyball, basketball, so forth. Now, if the person begins to regain whatever skills or abilities they have lost within the 2 years, then usually they'll continue to improve even after 2 years. But we're finding now with people in the military who have what's called post-traumatic stress disorder or a traumatic brain injury, that they may have some residual symptoms that go on for a number of years, or even after that 2-year mark, they may begin to show improvement with the right kinds of therapy, which is really good. Here's another link that you can click and look at, and you'll learn some about what are called neuroskills, neurological skills, and some of those people may lose when they have head injuries. Among them, fine motor skills, doing things like sewing, cutting, handwriting. Those things may become worse. Or gross motor skills, jumping rope, playing ball, riding a bicycle, anything along those lines could become worse depending on the part of the brain that's injured. Well, how does a child qualify to get help in school as having a traumatic brain injury? First of all, you have to have a physician who says the child had a brain injury. And the main way they find that out nowadays, of course, is they're doing things like CT scans and MRIs of the brain to see what damage there is. And also sometimes they do further diagnostic testing or even psychological testing like a school psychologist does if the child really seems to have lost a lot of academic skills. The injury must affect the child's ability to learn or their physical movement. If the part of their brain has been damaged that affects your movement and balance, then you may also qualify for special education help. Child may have never needed speech in his or her life, but all of a sudden needs speech therapy, or may qualify for occupational or physical therapy depending on the extent of the injury and, again, what part of the brain's been injured. Well, what can you do, teacher, if you have a student now who has a brain injury? Maybe the child's riding a bicycle, ran into the ditch over the weekend, hit head. Maybe the child was hit by a car crossing the road, fell, the head was hit on the concrete or the asphalt. It's very important to try to get any medical records that you can that explain what happened to the child and what the extent of the injuries are. The best way to do this is for you to notify the guidance counselor at your school and the principal, and one of those folks, or they may ask you to do it, may call the special ed director and send home the form to the parent, get the parent to sign permission to get medical records that will indicate if this child has a brain injury severe enough that they warrant getting special education help in a resource class or a self-contained class or some other kind of therapy that the school could provide. It's very important for the teacher and the other students in the class to know if this child may act a little differently, and for teachers to explain to folks that, you know, little Johnny has been out of school, he's been sick, and maybe they all know already that he was in a car wreck, and say, you know, sometimes things like that affect people. So we want to be very understanding and helpful to him when he comes back to school, because he may not be feeling well some days or may get a little mixed up. And again, you can't relay every bit of information that you may have learned about the child's medical condition, but you may need to say enough that the children realize that Johnny may act a little bit different, but he's still our friend, and we need to help him out in school. And have patience. I'll mention that a couple of times, because it's going to be an adjustment for that child and for your students if the child does act differently. Slide 14, some other tips. You know, talking with the parent, finding out what happened, and what your expectations should be for this child in the future. And just these reminders again, who to talk with, and try to get more info. Talking to the parent, guidance, getting the records sent as soon as possible, and many times the special education director can get records sent to the district faster than your guidance counselor, so that might be something to consider. Getting the right form to the parent and then getting it sent to the special ed director, who can call another school district or call these medical places when the guidance counselor or principal or someone may not have time, and they can kind of expedite getting these records to you. And remember, the child will need